Imagine going through 9 months of pregnancy, feeling every kick, every movement, and then finally, the moment arrives. You give birth, exhausted but overjoyed, waiting to hold your baby in your arms. But instead, the nurse looks at you with sorrow in her eyes and whispers, "I'm sorry, but your baby didn't make it." Your world shatters. The joy you had been waiting for turns into heartbreak. You never even get to say goodbye. The hospital staff moves quickly, telling you it's best not to see the baby. You're too weak to argue. Days later, you leave the hospital empty-handed, grieving the child you'll never know. But what if it was all a lie? What if your baby was still alive and had just been taken from you, sold to another family for a price? For over 30 years, this horrifying scenario wasn't fiction. It was reality. One woman, Georgia Tann, built an empire by stealing babies and selling them to the highest bidder. She was trusted by families, praised by the media, and protected by powerful people. Thousands of parents never knew the truth, and most disturbingly, many of her victims, now adults, are still out there today, living lives that were never meant to be theirs. This is the shocking true story of Georgia Tann, the midwife who stole and sold hundreds of babies.
God grant us the faith to put the past behind us.
We have a critical missing, age 16.
Your daughter has been trafficked and is being sold.
We gotta get out of here. Faster! Faster! Hurry!
Chapter 1. Introduction. To the outside world, Georgia Tann was a woman to be admired. She was the director of the Tennessee Children's Home Society, a well-respected adoption agency that promised to place orphaned and abandoned children into loving homes. She was praised by politicians, admired by the elite, and even celebrated in the media as a pioneer in child welfare. Families desperate to adopt saw her as a savior, the woman who could give them the child they had always dreamed of. But behind the carefully crafted image of a caring midwife and adoption agent was something far darker. Georgia Tann wasn't rescuing children, she was stealing them. She ran one of the largest and most sinister black market baby trafficking operations in American history. Under her leadership, more than 5,000 babies were taken from their real families, their identities erased, their birth records falsified. Some were kidnapped outright. Others were taken under false pretenses, with their mothers being told their babies had died at birth. And the worst part? She didn't just get away with it, she thrived. For over 3 decades, Georgia Tann operated in plain sight, protected by a web of corruption that stretched from hospitals to the highest levels of government. But how did she manage to steal thousands of babies without being stopped? And how many of her victims are still out there today, never knowing where they truly came from?
The condoms and the lube were right next to the kid's shirt and the socks.
Chapter 2. How she stole the babies. Georgia Tann's operation was as cruel as it was methodical. She didn't just steal babies, she perfected a system that allowed her to do it repeatedly, leaving thousands of mothers grieving for children they never truly lost. Her victims came from poor families, struggling single mothers, and even women who simply trusted their doctors and nurses. She created an entire network that enabled her to take children at will, forging documents, manipulating hospitals, and bribing authorities to cover her tracks. One of the most chilling ways she acquired babies was through hospital thefts. Many of her victims were newborns, taken directly from maternity wards before their mothers even had a chance to hold them. It worked like this. A woman would come to the hospital in labor, expecting to leave with her child. Instead, after giving birth, she would be told by the doctor or nurse that her baby had died. The grieving mother was often too weak or too devastated to ask questions.
I wanna be the best in the game, invest in my name. Check no restraints, I'm obsessed with the pain. I ingest, I retain, assess and I change. Possessed by the thought I'll be free one day from society's restraints. Money, clout, and fame, mud, disease, a plague. We all love to hate, have to play the game, have to make a name. All our insecurities are on display. This is war with the enemy, think that it was meant to be. Living in a time where disease is on every screen. I won't let them fester me, I know most are festering. Negativity is a plague for the mentally weak. No mercy, all I got is working. Never stop searching, never quench the thirsty. I'm toxic and psychotic with this logic, you can't stop it. It's been chronic since I was a boy, so neurotic and chaotic. Go! The website, waving up and change the past with all I'm achieving. Got my foot on gas, never stop competing. If you break the glass, then this life's gonna eat them. Make mistakes real fast, then you learn how to beat them. If you take off the cast, you can see all the healing. If the pain's in the past, move on from the grave and put your foot on the gas. No, never stop competing. I've been doing this, I'm on it.
Their fate
I just
now
wanna be
entirely in the
iconic.
hands of a woman
Sipping
who
on a
saw
gin
them
and
as nothing
tonic.
more
Got me
than
going
a
off when I'm on
product
this
to be
topic.
sold.
If I ever
Forced
play, I'll
adoptions
want it.
were another
You know
key
that I'm
part of
always
Georgia
honest.
Tann's
Stay away from
scheme.
those who are toxic. Keep 'em out your
Once
face,
a
no way,
baby
you don't
was in
want
her
it.
possession,
Don't try to drain my
she used an
energy.
elaborate
The
system of
enemy is
falsified
everything.
paperwork
It's
to make it
mentally,
legally
unhealthily
impossible for
spreading
parents
like
to
a rare
reclaim their
disease.
children.
But I won't let it get to me. I don't need your therapy. I can leave a legacy of leading by
And in some
intensity.
cases,
Come on,
judges
we
were
can fight
bribed to
this.
approve
Freedom
illegal
is
adoption.
priceless. Spread just like a
mother might
virus.
wake up from
Living
what she
in a
thought was a
crisis.
routine
Do you
hospital
feel
stay,
courageous? Do
only
you
to be
seek
handed a
greatness?
document
Trust me,
stating
you
that she
can
had
take
willingly
it. Go
given up
on
the
and
child
take
for
your
adoption.
aim.
Some women, particularly unwed mothers, were drugged or tricked into signing documents while heavily sedated, only realizing what had happened after it was too late. One such case involved a young woman who went into labor and was sedated during childbirth. When she woke up, groggy and disoriented, she was informed that her baby had been adopted. She had never signed a paper. She had never agreed to give up her child. But the hospital staff, working in partnership with Georgia Tann, told her there was nothing she could do. The adoption was final. Her baby was already gone. For years, Georgia perfected this system, ensuring that the real parents were powerless to fight back. By the time they realized what had happened, their child was already in another state, another home, with a completely different name. And no matter how desperately they searched, Georgia's web of corruption ensured that they would never be able to reclaim what was stolen from them. But what happened to these stolen babies? Where did they end up? And how much money did Georgia Tann make from this cruel operation? The answer is even darker than you can imagine.
No, if you look, they're sedated. They are sedated. Look at them. Look at
this. Chapter 3. Who bought these babies? For Georgia Tann, stealing babies was only the first step. The real profit came in selling them, and the people who bought these children were often among the wealthiest and most powerful in the country. Tann positioned herself as an elite adoption broker, marketing stolen babies as high-quality, hand-selected children available exclusively to those who could afford them. Her clientele included Hollywood celebrities, millionaires, politicians, and wealthy families who were desperate for a child but didn't want to go through the traditional adoption process. These were people who had influence, who could pay large sums of money under the table, and, most importantly, who never questioned where the babies were coming from. They simply trusted that Georgia Tann, the so-called pioneer of modern adoption, was running a legitimate operation. One of the most famous names linked to her scandal was Hollywood actress Joan Crawford, who adopted her twin daughters, Kathy and Cynthia, through Georgia Tann's agency. Crawford wasn't alone. Many high-profile figures of the time unknowingly participated in the black market adoption trade, believing they were rescuing orphans when, in reality, they were receiving stolen children. Tann made her business as exclusive as possible. Adoption wasn't simply about placing a child with a loving family. It was about making the rich feel special. She charged up to $5,000 per baby, which in today's money would be tens of thousands of dollars. The high price tag gave the illusion that these children were premium, superior, and worth every dollar. And because the adoption process was handled entirely through her, families never had to go through any formal legal channels. They were simply handed a baby, along with fake papers, and sent on their way. But while the wealthy got what they wanted, the birth mothers were left in lifelong grief, often unaware that their babies had been sold for profit. Many never even knew that their children were alive, let alone living under a different name in a different state. Some found out years later, only to discover that their children had grown up never knowing they existed. Others never found out at all. For Georgia Tann, business was booming. The demand for babies was so high that she expanded her operation, stretching across state lines, ensuring that children were constantly being taken, processed, and sold at a rapid pace. She ran newspaper ads featuring smiling babies dressed in fine clothing, making it seem like she was saving these children from a life of poverty. In reality, she was erasing their identities, breaking apart families, and leaving a trail of devastation that would last generations. But not every child was lucky enough to be adopted into a wealthy home. Many were never sold at all. Some were considered unsellable due to health issues, disabilities, or simply because they weren't deemed desirable enough for the elite. What happened to those children, the ones Georgia Tann couldn't profit from, is even more horrifying. Chapter 4. The Darkest Part. For the babies who weren't sold, life was a nightmare. Georgia Tann's business relied on keeping a steady supply of infants moving through her operation, but not every child was considered valuable. Those who were sick, disabled, or deemed less adoptable were often left to suffer in silence, hidden away in overcrowded nurseries, waiting for a fate worse than death. Tann housed these unwanted babies in facilities that were supposed to be temporary holding centers before adoption. In reality, they were neglectful, disease-ridden warehouses where infants were crammed together in filthy conditions. There weren't enough cribs, so some babies were forced to sleep on the floor. Others were left for days without food or proper care, their cries ignored by the very people who were supposed to protect them. Some simply wasted away, their small bodies too weak to survive. Reports from former nurses and social workers paint a horrifying picture. Babies with diaper rashes so severe their skin peeled off, children suffering from untreated illnesses, and rooms filled with the eerie silence of newborns too weak to cry anymore. When these babies inevitably died, their deaths were often covered up. No funeral, no burial, just another name erased from the records, another child whose existence was forgotten. But for some, death wasn't the worst outcome. There are disturbing accounts suggesting that some of these babies were used for illegal medical experiments. Because these children had no official past, no family to claim them, Tann allegedly allowed doctors to conduct medical procedures and experimental treatments on them. Whether it was untested vaccines, surgical procedures, or other horrifying tests, these babies became human test subjects, their tiny bodies treated as disposable. Yet, despite the suffering, despite the growing number of missing children, no one stopped her. For over 30 years, Georgia Tann carried out these crimes, protected by powerful allies and a corrupt system that chose to look the other way. But why? How did one woman manage to manipulate the legal system, silence grieving families, and maintain a business built on stolen lives? The answer lies in the network of corruption that shielded her from justice for decades.
I mean, between facial recognition software, voice recognition software, and all the different ways to track people, how can we in this day and age not be able to find them? How can hundreds of thousands of children have disappeared? The United States is the #1 destination in the world for sex trafficking, that every sex trafficking ring worldwide knows bring the kids to the United States.
Chapter 5. How she got away with it for 30 years. For over 3 decades, Georgia Tann ran one of the most corrupt and horrifying baby trafficking operations in American history. But the most chilling part? She didn't do it alone. She was protected, shielded by a network of powerful politicians, judges, and law enforcement officials who helped her cover up the truth. One of her strongest allies was E.H. Boss Crump, a political kingmaker who controlled much of Tennessee's government at the time. He ensured that Tann's illegal adoptions were rubber-stamped by judges, and in return, she made sure that wealthy families, often donors and supporters of Crump's machine, were able to adopt children without scrutiny. The corruption didn't stop at politics. Local police officers were bribed to ignore complaints from grieving parents. Whenever a family tried to report a missing child, they were dismissed or outright threatened. Some were told that their child had never existed, that there were no records of their birth, no documentation proving they had ever been pregnant. It was as if their babies had simply vanished. But for those who pushed too hard, the consequences were even worse. Some desperate mothers were labeled as mentally unstable and institutionalized to discredit them. Others were harassed until they were too afraid to speak up. The courts, fully under Georgia Tann's influence, denied every appeal, ensuring that no child ever returned to their rightful parents. She even manipulated public perception. Painting herself as a humanitarian. Articles were written about her work, praising her as a champion for orphans. The wealthy and powerful families who adopted from her never questioned where their children came from. Why would they? She provided them with the perfect baby, no questions asked. But Georgia Tann's empire wasn't built to last forever. While she had spent decades silencing her victims and paying off officials, her time was running out. A new governor was about to take office, one who wasn't part of the system that had protected her for years. And once the first cracks in her operation started to appear, it all came crashing down.
Gamified the system, pinned the buyer's information on the child, and immigration policy does the rest. It's a conveyor belt of exploitation where the children are delivered.
Chapter 6. The investigation that took her down. By the late 1940s, Georgia Tann's empire was beginning to crumble. For years, rumors had swirled about missing children and suspicious adoptions, but no one had dared to challenge her authority, until Tennessee's newly elected governor, Gordon Browning, decided to take a closer look. Unlike his predecessor, who had been deeply entrenched in Tann's network of corruption, Browning had no interest in protecting her. In 1949, he launched a full-scale investigation into the Tennessee Children's Home Society, and what he uncovered was beyond horrifying. State investigators discovered thousands of falsified adoption records with names erased, dates altered, and birth parents completely removed. They traced adoptions that had been forced, fraudulent, or outright illegal, with children disappearing into the hands of families across the country. But the most chilling discovery was what had happened to the children who were never adopted. Investigators found evidence of mass graves containing the remains of babies who had died in Tann's care. Some had succumbed to neglect, others to untreated illnesses. Official records listed dozens of infant deaths at the Tennessee Children's Home Society, but many more were never documented at all. It was clear that for every child successfully sold, another had perished in the system. As news of the scandal broke, families who had unknowingly adopted stolen children were horrified. Some adoptive parents tried to return their children to their biological families, but the paperwork had been so thoroughly falsified that tracing the true origins of these children was nearly impossible. For many, the damage was irreversible. Children had been permanently separated from their birth families, and no legal process could undo the deception that had stolen entire generations. And yet, despite the mountains of evidence, Georgia Tann would never face justice. Just as authorities were preparing charges against her, she was diagnosed with cancer. In a final stroke of luck, she died in September 1950, escaping the trial and imprisonment that should have awaited her. With her death, the state of Tennessee shut down the Tennessee Children's Home Society, but the consequences of her crimes would ripple through the decades. Even today, many of her victims are still searching for their real families, unaware that the life they lived was built on lies. Chapter 7. The Aftermath and Final Thought. Georgia Tann may have died before she could be punished, but the scars of her crimes remain. For decades, families torn apart by her black market baby trade searched for answers, many never finding the closure they desperately needed. Some of the stolen children, now adults, would go their entire lives never knowing the truth. Others would only learn late in life that the parents who raised them were never meant to be theirs. Even after her death, the damage she caused was impossible to undo. The falsified record she left behind made it nearly impossible for birth parents to find their stolen children. Many families were permanently lost to one another, their connections erased with the stroke of a pen. The state of Tennessee attempted to reform the adoption system in response to the scandal, but for thousands of victims, justice never came. Georgia Tann built her empire on lies, corruption, and stolen lives, and for over 30 years, she manipulated an entire system to serve her greed. Her actions led to one of the greatest adoption scandals in American history, one that still haunts the families she destroyed. But the most terrifying part? Even today, the full scale of her crimes is unknown. How many children are still out there, living with identities that were never meant to be theirs? How many families are still searching for loved ones they will never find? What do you think? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.